First Contact Protocol. The morning sky over Seoul turned dark as massive shadows blocked out the sun. Park Mina looked up from watering her tomato plants and squinted at the enormous metal shapes floating above the city. She had seen many strange things in her 73 years of life, but flying metal mountains were definitely new. The ships were bigger than anything humans had ever built. Each one stretched for miles across the sky, their black surfaces gleaming with strange lights that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. There were dozens of them, arranged in perfect formation above Earth's major cities. The sight should have terrified anyone who saw it, but Mina just frowned and continued watering her plants. "Grandmother, are you watching the news?" Her grandson, Kim Tae's voice crackled through her old radio, panic clear in every word. "You need to get to the shelters immediately. The military is saying these are alien ships. They want to hurt us." Mina set down her watering can and wiped her hands on her apron. "Aliens or not, my vegetables still need water," she said calmly. "Besides, I have lived through wars before. Running around like a headless chicken never helped anyone." High above the earth, Admiral Vextar of the Krellian Fourth Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devourer of Worlds. He was 7 feet tall with gray skin marked by battle scars from dozens of conquered planets. His red eyes glowed as he looked down at the small blue world below him. "Begin the standard protocol," he commanded his bridge crew. His voice was deep and harsh, like grinding metal. "Send the surrender message to all major population centers." The communications officer pressed several buttons on his console. Across Earth, every television, radio, and computer screen suddenly displayed the same message. A translation program made the alien words understandable in every human language. "People of Earth," the message began, "you are now under the authority of the Krellian Empire. Your planet has been selected for incorporation into our galactic regime. You have 72 Earth hours to surrender all military forces and prepare for occupation. Any resistance will result in orbital bombardment and the complete destruction of your civilization. This is your only warning." In military bases around the world, alarms began screaming. General Lee Han rushed into the emergency command center in Seoul, his uniform still half-buttoned. Maps and screens covered every wall, showing the positions of the alien ships and Earth's pathetic defensive capabilities. "What do we have?" he asked his aide, Major Park Soo. 37 massive ships in total, sir," Park Soo reported, reading from a tablet. "They appeared simultaneously over every major city on Earth. Our satellites detected no approach. They just materialized out of nothing." General Lee studied the tactical displays. Earth's entire military consisted of jets, tanks, and missiles designed to fight other humans. Against technology that could travel between stars, they might as well be throwing rocks. "Have we tried communicating with them?" Lee asked. "Ambassador, Yoon Hai is preparing a diplomatic response now, sir, but initial attempts at radio contact have been ignored." Across the city, in a government building that had seen better days, Ambassador Yoon Hai sat at her desk, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. She had been awake for 18 hours straight, trying to craft a message that might prevent humanity's extinction. The weight of 7 billion lives pressed down on her shoulders. "How do you negotiate with beings who can cross space?" she muttered to herself, typing and deleting the same sentences over and over. What could Earth possibly offer that they cannot take by force? Meanwhile, Dr. Choi Bin worked frantically in his laboratory at Seoul National University. As Earth's leading expert in theoretical physics, he had been tasked with analyzing the alien technology. The ships violated every law of physics he understood. They had no visible engines, yet maintained perfect stability in Earth's atmosphere. Their hull materials reflected light in impossible ways. "The energy readings are off the charts," he told his research assistant, Dr. Kim Yuna. "Each ship generates more power than our entire electrical grid. If they wanted to destroy us, they could do it in minutes." Back on her rooftop, Mina continued tending her garden as if nothing unusual was happening. Her neighbors had all fled to the underground shelters, leaving the building empty except for her and Mrs. Jung A from the apartment next door. "Mina, are you not worried about these flying things?" Mrs. Jung A called from her own balcony, gesturing at the massive ship hovering directly overhead. "Worried? Why should I be worried?" Mina replied, deadheading some wilted flowers. "If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already. Instead, they are just sitting there making noise and blocking my sunlight." Mrs. Jung A shook her head. "The news says they are going to attack if we do not surrender." "The news says many things," Mina said dismissively. "Most of it is nonsense. These visitors have no manners, arriving without proper introduction, but that does not make them evil. Just poorly raised." On the Krellian flagship, Admiral Vextar reviewed reports from his reconnaissance teams. The humans had primitive technology, barely capable of reaching their own moon. Their military forces were scattered and weak. By all standard measures, this should be the easiest conquest in Krellian history. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we are detecting massive population movements. The humans are evacuating their cities." "Expected behavior," Vextar replied. "Fear makes conquered species more compliant. Have the scout ships identified key military installations?" "Yes, sir. We can eliminate their entire defense capability within 6 hours of your command." Vextar nodded. "Maintain position for now. Let them suffer in anticipation. Fear is often more effective than immediate violence." As night fell over Seoul, the city that once never slept lay in unnatural silence. Streetlights created small pools of illumination beneath the alien ships, whose mysterious lights pulsed like slow lightning. Most of the population had fled to underground bunkers, leaving the surface world to the shadows and the waiting. But on one small rooftop garden, an elderly woman sat in a plastic chair sipping tea and watching the stars. The massive alien ship above her hummed with unknown energy, its bulk blotting out half the sky. Mina looked up at it with the same expression she might use to examine a neighbor's poorly behaved dog. "No consideration at all," she said to her. "Tomato plants. Parking right in front of someone's home without asking permission. Their mothers clearly did not teach them proper manners." The ship continued its ominous humming, unaware that it was being judged by the most dangerous force in the galaxy, a disappointed grandmother. Tomorrow would bring the first real test of strength between two civilizations. The Krellians had their advanced weapons, their massive ships, and their reputation as conquerors of worlds. Humanity had its desperate courage, its stubborn refusal to surrender, and Park Mina. The aliens were about to discover which was truly the more powerful force. Grandmother's garden. The second day of the invasion began with a mechanical whining sound that grew louder and louder until it became unbearable. Park Mina looked up from her morning coffee to see a small metal object spinning wildly through the air above her rooftop garden. The thing was about the size of a washing machine, covered in blinking lights and making angry beeping noises. "Now what is this nonsense?" she muttered, setting down her cup and reaching for her reading glasses. The spinning object suddenly lurched to one side, smoke pouring from its bottom. It crashed directly into her prize pepper plants, the ones she had been growing for the neighborhood. Kimchi competition. Soil and broken stems flew everywhere. The machine landed upside down, its lights flickering weakly before going dark. Mina stared at the destruction in silence for a long moment. Then she stood up, brushed the dirt off her apron, and walked over to examine the damage. Her beautiful pepper plants were completely ruined. 6 months of careful watering, fertilizing, and pruning destroyed in seconds by this flying piece of junk. "Unacceptable," she said firmly. High above on the bridge of the Krellian flagship, Technician Zalek nervously approached Admiral Vextar. "Sir, we have lost contact with reconnaissance drone 742. Last telemetry showed it crashing in the urban area." "Equipment failure?" the Admiral asked, not looking up from his battle plans. Unknown, sir. We should send a recovery team immediately. The drone contains classified scanning technology. Vexatar waved a dismissive hand. Deploy a standard retrieval squad. These primitives cannot possibly understand our technology well, enough to reverse engineer it. Within an hour, a small Krellian transport ship descended from the main fleet. It landed on the empty street in front of Mina's apartment building with a soft hum, its black hull gleaming in the morning sun. A ramp lowered from the ship's side, and 6 Krellian soldiers marched out in perfect formation. Sub-Commander Thrak led the squad. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his gray skin covered by advanced battle armor that could stop bullets and energy weapons. His red eyes glowed behind his helmet's visor as he scanned the area with military precision. Behind him, 5 other warriors carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They had fought across dozens of worlds, crushed rebellions on 100 planets. The retrieval of one crashed drone from a primitive world should have been the easiest mission of their careers. Thrak consulted the scanner on his wrist. The drone is on the building's roof level. Maintain formation. These humans may attempt to interfere. The squad climbed the stairs to the rooftop, their heavy boots echoing in the empty building. When they reached the top, they found an elderly human female standing next to their crashed drone. She was holding a wooden spoon in one hand and pointing it at the damaged machine like a weapon. "You," Mina said firmly, pointing the spoon at Thrak. "Are you responsible for this mess?" The sub-commander stopped in surprise. According to their intelligence reports, humans should have been cowering in fear at the sight of Krellian warriors. This small female showed no signs of terror. Instead, she looked annoyed. "Human," Thrak said in his best intimidating voice, "step away from Krellian property. You will not be harmed if you comply immediately." Mina looked him up and down, unimpressed. "Property? This flying garbage truck destroyed my pepper plants? Do you have any idea how long it takes to grow peppers from seed?" "That is not our concern," Thrak replied, gesturing for his soldiers to move forward. "Retrieve the drone and return to the ship." As the warriors approached the crashed machine, Mina stepped directly into their path. "Not so fast. In civilized society, when you break something that belongs to someone else, you apologize and offer to fix it." Thrak had conquered worlds where entire armies fled at the sight of his battle armor. He had never encountered a being who treated him like a misbehaving child. "Human, you do not understand the situation. We are Krellian warriors. We take what we require." "Is that so?" Mina raised the wooden spoon and brought it down sharply on Thrak's armored wrist with a loud crack. "And I am Park Mina, and this is my garden. Your flying machine broke my plants, scattered soil everywhere, and ruined 6 months of hard work." The other Krellian soldiers stared in shock. Their sub-commander, veteran of 50 battles, was being scolded by a tiny human grandmother with a kitchen utensil. "Your machine made this mess," Mina continued, poking Thrak in the chest with the spoon. "So you will clean it up. You will replant my peppers, and you will do it properly, with respect for the plants and the soil that feeds them." Thrak looked down at the small human female who barely reached his chest. His training told him to simply push her aside and complete the mission, but something in her stern expression reminded him of his own grandmother back on the Krellian homeworld, the one being in the galaxy who had never been afraid to correct his behavior. "We do not have time for this," he said, but his voice sounded less certain than before. "Oh, you have time," Mina replied. "You have been sitting up there in your flying ships for 2 days, doing nothing but making noise and blocking the sunlight. Surely you can spare a few minutes to clean up your mess." One of the other soldiers stepped forward. "Sub-Commander, should we neutralize this threat?" "Threat?" Mina turned her attention to the new speaker. "Young man, the only threat here is To my tomatoes if you keep trampling around in those heavy boots. Watch where you step. The soldier, who had personally destroyed tank battalions on 3 different worlds, found himself carefully checking the ground before taking another step. Thrak activated his communicator. Command, we have encountered an unexpected situation. During drone retrieval, Admiral Vextar's voice crackled through the device. Explain. The human, she is demanding we repair damage caused by the drone crash. There was a long pause. Are you requesting backup, Sub-Commander? Thrak looked at Mina, who was now examining the broken pepper plants with a critical eye. Negative, sir. We are assessing the situation. Make it quick, the Admiral replied. We have a schedule to maintain. Mina overheard the conversation and shook her head. Schedule? What kind of schedule involves barging into other people's homes and breaking their belongings? Were you all raised in barns? She walked over to a small shed in the corner of the rooftop and returned with a broom, a dustpan, and several small gardening tools. These she thrust into the hands of the surprised Krellian warriors. Now then, she said, clapping her hands together like a teacher addressing unruly students. The first step in taking responsibility for your actions is cleaning up the damage. Start by sweeping up all that scattered soil. Sub-Commander Thrak found himself holding a broom that looked ridiculously small in his armored hands. Around him, his elite warrior squad stood frozen in confusion, clutching gardening tools they had never seen before. Move along, Mina encouraged them. The soil will not sweep itself. And be gentle with the undamaged plants. They are delicate. For the first time in his military career, Thrak began to sweep. 20 minutes later, the rooftop was clean. The broken drone had been carefully moved to one side, and 6 Krellian warriors sat in a circle while Mina explained the proper technique for transplanting seedlings. The roots are the most important part, she told them patiently. Handle them gently, like you would handle a newborn baby. Plants are living things. They deserve respect. From their ship below, the remaining crew members watched through their scopes as their elite soldiers received gardening lessons from an elderly human grandmother. Nobody knew quite what to report to Admiral Vextar. The galaxy's most feared warriors had encountered their first defeat, and it had come at the hands of a wooden spoon and a firm lecture about proper manners. Lessons in manners. Admiral Vextar stood in his private quarters, staring at the reports from Sub-Commander Thrak's mission. According to the files, his elite warrior squad had spent 3 hours helping an elderly human female replant vegetables. The drone had been retrieved, but not before his soldiers had been taught proper gardening techniques. This is unacceptable, he muttered to himself. We are the Krellian Empire. We do not garden. But the reports bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Thrak was one of his best officers, a veteran of dozens of successful invasions. If this human could confuse and redirect such an experienced warrior, what kind of threat did she really represent? The Admiral made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He would personally investigate this Park Mina and discover what made her so dangerous. Then he would eliminate the threat and get his invasion back on schedule. An hour later, Admiral Vextar descended to Earth's surface in his personal combat armor. The suit was a masterpiece of Krellian technology designed to survive direct hits from military weapons. Energy shields flickered around his massive frame as he approached the small apartment building. His plan was simple. He would demonstrate overwhelming force, break the human spirit, and make an example that would discourage further resistance. The invasion would proceed as intended, but when he reached the rooftop garden, he found Park Mina sitting at a small plastic table, calmly, sipping tea from a delicate ceramic cup. She looked up at his 7-foot armored form and frowned slightly. "Young man," she said in a tone that somehow made the feared admiral feel like a child. "What are you doing stomping around my garden in those ridiculous metal boots? You will damage the plants." Vextar activated his armor's intimidation systems. His visor glowed red, his voice amplifier made threatening sounds, and his energy weapons hummed with barely contained power. Human, I am Admiral Vextar of the Krellian Fourth Fleet. You will submit to immediate questioning or face the consequences. Mina set down her teacup and studied him with the same expression she might use to examine a particularly badly behaved dog. Are you the one in charge of those rude young soldiers who made such a mess earlier? They are my subordinates, Vextar replied, confused by the question. Then you are responsible for their behavior, Mina said firmly. And their behavior was completely unacceptable. Crashing into someone's garden, breaking their plants, and then acting like they owned the place. Is that how you taught them to treat other people? The Admiral's weapons systems detected no threat from the small human female. His scanners showed she carried no weapons, had no military training, and posed no physical danger whatsoever. Yet, something about her stern gaze made him feel oddly uncomfortable. They were following orders, he said, but his voice sounded less certain than usual. Orders? Mina stood up and brushed imaginary dust off her apron. What kind of orders involve destroying other people's property and refusing to clean up the, mess? Did your mother not teach you any manners at all? Vexitar had conquered 17 different worlds. He had faced armies, space battles, and diplomatic crises that had lasted for years. But no one had ever asked him about his mother's teachings, and he found himself thinking about childhood lessons he had not remembered in decades. That is not relevant to this situation, he said, trying to regain control of the conversation. Everything is relevant when you are talking about proper behavior, Mina replied. She gestured to the chair across from her. Now sit down. You look tired, and we need to have a serious conversation about your manners. I do not sit, Vextar said automatically. I am a Krellian admiral. I give orders and others obey. Mina raised one eyebrow in a way that somehow made his powerful armor feel like a child's costume. Is that so? And how is that working out for you? Are you happy with the way your life has turned out? The question hit the admiral like a physical blow. Happy? When was the last time anyone had asked him if he was happy? When was the last time he had even thought about happiness? His life was duty, conquest, and the endless expansion of the Krellian Empire. Happiness is not important, he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Nonsense, Mina replied briskly. Everyone deserves to be happy, but you cannot be truly happy if you spend your time hurting other people and taking things that do not belong to you. She poured hot tea into a second cup and placed it on the table. Now sit down and drink this tea. You look like you have not had a proper meal or a good rest in months. Against every instinct of his military training, Admiral Vextar found himself removing his helmet and sitting down at the small plastic table. The chair creaked under his weight, but it held. Mina pushed the teacup toward him, and he picked it up with hands that seemed too large for such a delicate object. The tea was warm and tasted like nothing he had ever experienced. It was sweet, but not too sweet, with flavors that reminded him of growing things and peaceful afternoons. He had not realized how thirsty he was until he began drinking. Better? Mina asked, settling back into her own chair. Now then, tell me about yourself. What did you want to be when you were young, before all this military business? I wanted to be an engineer, Vextar heard himself saying, then stopped in surprise. He had not thought about his childhood dreams in 50 years. I wanted to build things, bridges, buildings, ships for exploration instead of war. That sounds wonderful, Mina said encouragingly. What happened to change your mind? For the next 2 hours, Admiral Vextar found himself telling his life story to a human grandmother he had planned to intimidate. He told her about his childhood on the Krellian homeworld, about the military academy that had shaped him into a weapon, about the wars that had consumed his adult life. Mina listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions or offering more tea. When he finished speaking, she was quiet for a long moment. "You have had a very difficult life," she said finally. "But you are not a bad person. You have just forgotten how to be kind." "Kindness is weakness," Vextar replied, but the words sounded like something someone else had taught him rather than something he truly believed. "Kindness is strength," Mina corrected him gently. "It takes much more courage to help someone than to hurt them. Anyone can destroy things. Only someone truly strong can build something beautiful." As the sun began to set over Seoul, the most feared admiral in the Krellian fleet sat in a rooftop garden, learning about kindness from an elderly human woman who saw past his armor to the person he had once wanted to be. The ripple effect news of Admiral Vextar's extended absence spread through the Krellian fleet like wildfire. The bridge crew of the flagship watched their command screens in confusion as their leader's personal signal remained stationary on the planet's surface for hours. According to regulations, a reconnaissance mission should never last more than 30 minutes. Captain Grokhan, the fleet's tactical officer, paced nervously around the bridge. "Should we send a rescue team? The Admiral might be captured or under some kind of mind control." "The Admiral specifically ordered no interference," replied Communications Officer Zelthara, checking her instruments for the 100th time. "His vital signs are normal. He appears to be talking." "Talking?" Captain Grokhan stopped pacing. "For 6 hours?" Down on Earth, word of the Admiral's peaceful visit had somehow reached other members of the Krellian fleet. Sub-Commander Thrak, still embarrassed about his gardening lesson, decided to investigate what his superior was really doing on that rooftop. He arrived just as Mina was serving dinner to Admiral Vexitar, who had removed most of his armor and was sitting comfortably at the small table. The sight of his commanding officer eating homemade soup with a human grandmother was so shocking that Thrak forgot to announce his presence. "Ah, there you are," Mina said, noticing the sub-commander standing frozen in the doorway. "Perfect timing. I made extra soup, and you still owe me an apology for breaking my pepper plants." "I brought these," Thrak said awkwardly, holding up a small bundle of flowers he had picked from a park on his way to the building. "For the garden, to replace what was damaged." Mina accepted the flowers graciously and examined them with approval. "These are lovely. You have a good eye for color. Come sit down and eat something. You look thin." Admiral Vextar looked up from his soup and nodded at his subordinate. "The food is excellent, Sub-Commander. You should try it." Thrak sat down slowly, still trying to process the scene. His feared admiral was having dinner with an elderly human female and apparently enjoying himself. This was not covered in any military training manual. "Now then," Mina said, ladling soup into a bowl for Thrak, "the Admiral has been telling me about his plans to conquer our planet. I explained to him that this was very rude behavior, and we have been discussing better ways to handle disagreements." "Better ways?" Thrak asked weakly. "Communication," Admiral Vextar said, sounding like he was repeating a lesson. "Before you take something that belongs to someone else, you should ask permission and explain why you need it. Most reasonable people will try to help if you approach them politely." Thrak stared at his superior in amazement. "Sir, are you feeling well?" "I feel better than I have in years," the Admiral replied honestly. "Park Mina has been teaching me about human customs. Did you know they have entire social systems based on voluntary cooperation rather than force?" By the end of the evening, 3 Krellian officers sat around Mina's table, learning to play a Korean card game while she explained the principles of conflict resolution. Mrs. Jung-ae from next door joined them, bringing homemade cookies and offering to teach anyone interested how to knit. Word of these unusual activities somehow reached the other ships in the fleet. Captain Grokhan, driven by curiosity and concern for his commanding officers, decided to investigate personally. He arrived at the apartment building to find a small crowd of Krellian warriors sitting in a circle on the rooftop, listening intently as Mina demonstrated proper table manners. The fork goes on the left, she was explaining patiently to a group of soldiers who had conquered half the galaxy. The knife goes on the right. And always remember to chew with your mouth closed. No one wants to see your food while you are eating. Communications officer Zelthara had also made her way to the surface, drawn by reports that defied all logic. She found herself assigned to help with laundry, while receiving a detailed explanation of how to remove stains from different types of fabric. The secret to getting blood out of clothing, Mina told her, demonstrating on a shirt that had been damaged during combat training, is cold water and patience. Hot water will set the stain permanently. This is very useful information, Zelthara admitted, taking careful notes. Our standard procedure is to discard damaged garments. Wasteful, Mina replied with disapproval. Good clothing should be repaired and cared for properly. It shows respect for the people who made it and the materials used to create it. As more Krellian officers arrived to investigate the situation, Mina organized them into small groups and assigned different educational activities. Some learned to cook simple Korean dishes under her careful supervision. Others practiced basic conversation skills or received lessons in conflict resolution. Captain Grokhan found himself in the kitchen, learning to prepare kimchi while discussing the importance of preserving cultural traditions. Food is memory, Mina explained as she showed him how to properly season the vegetables. When you share a meal with someone, you share part of your history and your heart. We do not have similar customs, Grokhan admitted, carefully following her instructions. Krellian society focuses on efficiency and military strength. And are your people happy? Mina asked gently. The question stopped him cold. Happiness was not a concept emphasized in Krellian culture. Success, duty, and honor were valued, but personal satisfaction or joy were rarely discussed. I do not know, he said finally. We do not often think about such things. Perhaps you should, Mina suggested. A society that does not care about the happiness of its people cannot truly be called successful. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Krellian flagship, the remaining crew members watched their instruments in growing bewilderment. More than half their officers had now descended to the planet's surface, and none showed any signs of returning. The invasion fleet that had arrived to conquer Earth was slowly transforming into something unprecedented in galactic history. A cultural exchange program, Admiral Vexitar, now wearing a hand-knitted sweater that Mrs. Jung-A had made for him, stood on the rooftop and looked up at his fleet. The ships still looked threatening against the night sky, but somehow they seemed less important than they had that morning. Sir, Subcommander Thrak approached respectfully. The crew is beginning to ask questions about our mission timeline. Let them ask, the Admiral replied calmly. We are learning valuable lessons here. Lessons that might change how the Krellian Empire approaches expansion in the future. Change, sir? Admiral Vexitar thought about his conversation with Mina, about the childhood dreams he had abandoned, about the possibility of building things instead of destroying them. Perhaps it is time for the galaxy to try cooperation instead of conquest, he said quietly. Perhaps there is a better way to bring different species together than through force and fear. As the night deepened over Sol, the most powerful invasion fleet in Krellian history continued its transformation from conquerors to students, learning lessons that no military academy had ever taught. The power of kindness, the strength found in community, and the revolutionary idea that true victory comes not from defeating your enemies, but from turning them into friends. Universal truths. 3 days after the Krellian invasion fleet's arrival, the Galactic regime's Supreme Council received the most disturbing report in their 1,000-year history. Admiral Vexitar's forces had not only failed to conquer Earth, they had apparently established some kind of cultural exchange program with the primitive humans. Overlord Malkoreth, Supreme Commander of all regime forces, read the intelligence reports with growing disbelief. According to their spies, Krellian warriors were learning to cook, participating in craft activities, and engaging in something called polite conversation with their intended victims. This is clearly some form of advanced mind control, Malkoreth declared to his war council. The humans have developed psychological weapons we do not understand. I will personally lead a second fleet to complete the conquest and rescue our compromised forces. Malkoreth was the most feared being in the galaxy. He stood 9 feet tall, with black armor that could withstand planetary bombardment and weapons, capable of destroying entire star systems. He had personally conquered more worlds than any other regime commander, ruling through absolute terror and overwhelming force. His reinforcement fleet consisted of 50 additional warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than the original Krellian vessels. When they arrived in Earth's solar system, the combined armada blocked out the sun over 3 continents. But instead of the grateful surrender he expected from Admiral Vex-Tar, Malkoreth received a polite invitation to join them for lunch. Lunch? He roared at his communications officer. They invite me to lunch? I am the supreme commander of the Galactic regime. I do not eat with primitives. Sir, the officer replied nervously, Admiral Vex-Tar specifically requested that you visit the surface to discuss new diplomatic protocols. He says the situation is more complex than our initial reports indicated. Malkoreth decided to handle this insult personally. He would demonstrate proper regime authority, eliminate whatever mind control technology the humans were using, and complete the conquest with maximum brutality as an example to other worlds. He descended to Earth in full battle armor, accompanied by his personal guard of 12 elite warriors. Each soldier was a veteran of hundreds of battles, trained to show no mercy and feel no fear. They had crushed rebellions on 50 different worlds, but when they reached Mina's apartment building, they found Admiral Vex-Tar standing outside wearing civilian clothes and a cheerful smile. Overlord, Vex-Tar said respectfully, I am glad you could come. Park Mina has prepared a wonderful meal, and there are several things we need to discuss about our mission parameters. What happened to your armor? Malkoreth demanded, studying his subordinate for signs of injury or drug influence. It was uncomfortable, Vex-Tar replied simply. Mina explained that wearing weapons and armor when visiting someone's home is considered very rude in human culture. It suggests you do not trust your host or plan to cause trouble. Malkoreth's rage nearly overwhelmed his control systems. You removed your armor because a primitive told you it was rude? It made sense when she explained it, Vex-Tar said calmly. We are guests here. We should behave like guests. Before Malkoreth could respond, Mina appeared in the doorway. She looked up at the massive armored figure and smiled warmly. You must be the friend Admiral Vex-Tar told me about, she said pleasantly. Welcome to my home. Please come in and make yourself comfortable. Malkoreth stared down at the small human female who barely reached his chest armor. According to his intelligence files, this was the being responsible for compromising an entire Krellian fleet. She looked like someone's grandmother. I am not your friend, he said in his most intimidating voice. I am Overlord Malkoreth, Supreme Commander of the Galactic regime. You will submit to immediate interrogation or face total destruction. Mina listened politely to his speech, then shook her head with the same expression she might use with a child throwing a tantrum. My goodness, she said gently. Someone certainly has not been getting enough sleep. You sound very cranky. Are you hungry? I find that people are always more reasonable after a good meal. She turned and walked back into her apartment, clearly expecting him to follow. I made extra soup today because Admiral Vex-Tar said you might be joining us. I hope you like vegetables. Malkoreth found himself following her inside, his elite guard trailing behind in confusion. Mina's apartment was small and simple, decorated with family photographs and handmade crafts. It was the least threatening environment he had ever encountered. Sit. Anywhere you like, Mina said, bustling around her kitchen. The table is a bit small for everyone, but we can make do. Admiral Vex-Tar, would you help me serve the soup? Of course, Vex-Tar replied, moving naturally to assist with the meal preparation. Malkareth watched in amazement as his subordinate, who commanded 4 dozen warships, carefully ladled soup into bowls and arranged them on a simple wooden table. This was beyond any form of mind control he understood. "I do not eat," Malkareth announced. "I am here to complete the conquest of this world and restore proper military discipline to our forces." Mina set a bowl of soup in front of him anyway. "Everyone needs to eat," she said matter-of-factly. "And before we talk about serious things like conquering, we should make sure everyone feels welcome and comfortable." She sat down across from him and folded her hands in her lap. "Now then, tell me about yourself. What kind of work do you do when you are not visiting other planets?" "I conquer worlds," Malkareth replied automatically. "I crush resistance and expand the regime's territory." "That sounds very stressful," Mina said sympathetically. "Do you enjoy your work?" The question caught him completely off guard. Enjoy? He had never considered whether he enjoyed conquest. It was his duty, his purpose, the only life he had ever known. "Enjoyment is irrelevant," he said, but his voice sounded uncertain. "I disagree," Mina replied gently. "Life is too short to spend it doing things that make you unhappy. What did you want to do when you were young, before all this conquering business?" Malkareth stared at her in silence. No one had ever asked him about his childhood dreams. No one had ever suggested that his feelings mattered or that he had choices about his life's direction. "I wanted to explore," he heard himself saying. "I wanted to see new worlds and learn about different species. I was curious about how other beings lived and what they had discovered." "That sounds wonderful," Mina said encouragingly. "Exploration is much more interesting than conquest. When you conquer someone, you only learn about their military weaknesses. When you explore and make friends, you learn about their art, their food, their stories, their wisdom." "The regime does not make friends," Malkareth said, but the words sounded hollow. "Why not?" Mina asked simply. The question stopped him cold. Why didn't the regime make friends? The official answer was that friendship showed weakness, that cooperation was inefficient, that only fear and force could maintain order across the galaxy. But sitting in this small, peaceful kitchen, those answers seemed less convincing than they once had. "Because," he said slowly, "that is not how we have always done things." "Just because you have always done something one way does not mean it is the best way," Mina replied wisely. "Sometimes old habits need to be changed when you learn better methods." For the next 3 hours, the Supreme Commander of the Galactic regime sat at a humble kitchen table, eating homemade soup and talking about his dreams, his fears, and his growing realization that conquest had never brought him the satisfaction he had expected. Mina listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and gradually helped him understand that strength could be measured in ways that had nothing to do with weapons or fear. When evening came, Malkareth found himself helping with the dishes while his elite guard learned to play Korean card games with Mrs. Jung-ai. The most powerful military force in galactic history was discovering that some victories could only be won through kindness, and that the greatest conquest of all was conquering your own desire to conquer others. Grandmother's Empire. 6 months after the Krellian fleet's arrival, Earth had become the most peaceful planet in the galaxy. What had begun as an invasion had transformed into the largest cultural exchange program in galactic history. The apartment building where Park Mina lived had been quietly converted into an unofficial embassy, with representatives from dozens of alien species coming to learn what they now called the Korean grandmother method of conflict resolution. Mina found herself appointed as Earth's first galactic cultural ambassador, a position she accepted with the same practical attitude she brought to everything else. Her small apartment had been expanded to include a proper conference room, but she insisted that all important meetings still take place around her kitchen table. "Food brings people together," she explained to the Galactic Council representatives. who visited to formalize the new diplomatic protocols. When you share a meal with someone, you cannot think of them as an enemy. Admiral Vextar, now serving as Earth's military cultural liaison, had traded his battle armor for comfortable civilian clothes and a collection of hand-knitted sweaters. His transformation from feared conqueror to enthusiastic student of human customs had become legendary throughout the fleet. "The Admiral is learning to grow tomatoes," Sub-Commander Thrak reported to the visiting council members. "He says gardening teaches patience and respect for life. His plants are already producing fruit." Sub-Commander Thrak himself had undergone his own remarkable transformation. After discovering an unexpected talent for cooking, he had opened what he proudly called the galaxy's first Korean restaurant, managed by a Krellian warrior. The establishment had become enormously popular with both humans and aliens, serving as an informal meeting place where different species could share meals and learn about each other's cultures. Communications Officer Zelthera had found her calling in textile arts. Under Mrs. Jung-A's patient instruction, she had become an expert knitter and had established the Interspecies Craft Exchange Program. Her workshops were attended by beings from 12 different worlds, all learning to create beautiful things instead of weapons. Captain Grokhan had perhaps undergone the most dramatic change of all. His natural curiosity about different cultures had led him to become Earth's first alien student of human history. He spent his days in libraries and museums, documenting human achievements and traditions with the same intensity he had once applied to military strategy. "Humans have created so much beauty," he told anyone who would listen. "Art, music, literature, philosophy. We have been conquering worlds for centuries, but we never stopped to learn what made those worlds worth conquering in the first place." The success of the Korean grandmother method had not gone unnoticed by other species in the galaxy. Overlord Malkoreth, who had initially come to Earth to crush the human threat, had become one of Mina's most devoted students and advocates. "I have conquered 47 worlds," he announced to the Galactic Council during a formal session, "but I learned more about strength and leadership from one human grandmother than from all my military training combined." The Council had initially been skeptical of these reports. The idea that a single elderly human could transform the galaxy's most feared military leaders seemed impossible. But when they sent their own investigators to Earth, the results were always the same. Hardened warriors and ruthless politicians found themselves learning to cook, participating in craft activities, and discovering the satisfaction that came from building rather than destroying. The Korean grandmother method was formally adopted as the galaxy's new standard for diplomatic relations. Instead of threatening invasion, aggressive species were now invited to Earth for cultural education sessions with carefully trained teams of Korean grandmothers and their alien graduates. Mina oversaw the training program personally, teaching alien diplomats the fundamental principles that had transformed the Krellian fleet. Treat everyone with respect, listen more than you speak, always offer food to guests, and remember that behind every aggressive behavior is usually someone who is scared, lonely, or hungry. "The secret," she explained to a group of new students that included representatives from the warlike Zephyrian Empire, "is to see past the angry words and threatening gestures. Most beings who act mean are actually just sad or afraid. When you respond with kindness instead of fear, you give them permission to be better than they thought they could be." The transformation of galactic society was remarkable and swift. Species that had been enemies for centuries began establishing trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. The old galactic regime, built on conquest and fear, gradually evolved into the galactic community, founded on cooperation and mutual respect. Wars did not disappear entirely, but they became increasingly rare as more species learned to resolve conflicts through communication rather than violence. The galaxy's military fleets were gradually converted to exploration and rescue services, discovering new worlds to befriend rather than conquer. Earth itself became a center of learning and diplomacy. The Korean Grandmother Training Academy was established in Seoul, where beings from across the galaxy came to study conflict resolution, cultural sensitivity, and the art of making others feel welcome and valued. Admiral Vex Tar, now serving as the Academy's Director of Practical Applications, often reflected on how much his life had changed since that first day in Mina's garden. "I spent 50 years of my life destroying things," he told new students during orientation sessions. "But I have spent the last year learning to grow things, to build things, to create beauty instead of fear. I can honestly say that this past year has been the happiest of my entire life." Mrs. Jung-ai had become the Academy's Director of Hospitality, teaching alien students the importance of proper table manners, comfortable living spaces, and the healing power of handmade gifts. Her knitting circles had become legendary throughout the galaxy, with waiting lists that stretched for months. Park Mina herself remained exactly as she had always been, a practical, no-nonsense grandmother who treated everyone with the same firm kindness she had shown to the alien warriors who crashed into her garden. She still lived in her small apartment, still tended her rooftop garden, and still insisted that any being causing trouble in the galaxy simply needed a good meal and someone to listen to their problems. "People always ask me how I knew the Korean grandmother method would work," she said during a rare interview with Galactic Media. "But I did not know anything special. I just treated those alien visitors the same way I would treat any young person who was acting badly, with patience, kindness, and firm boundaries. Every mother in the galaxy understands these principles. I just happened to be the first one who had the chance to use them on alien invaders." On the 5-year anniversary of First Contact, the galaxy celebrated the first annual Day of Grandmother Appreciation. Across hundreds of worlds, beings of all species took time to honor the elderly members of their communities and to remember the lessons of patience, kindness, and wisdom that had transformed their civilization. The celebration's centerpiece was a simple ceremony in Mina's rooftop garden, where representatives from 50 different species gathered to share a meal and exchange stories about the family members who had shaped their lives. Admiral Vex Tar, now a grandfather himself thanks to his marriage to a human engineer named Dr. Kim Yuna, helped serve the traditional Korean dishes that had become symbols of galactic unity. His own grandchildren, half human and half Krellian, played among the tomato plants that had started it all. "Grandmother Mina," asked a young Zephyrian diplomat, "do you ever regret that the aliens chose your garden to crash into? Your quiet? Life was certainly disturbed." Mina smiled and looked around at the peaceful gathering of species that had once been enemies. Beings who had spent centuries fighting were now sharing recipes, teaching each other traditional games, and making plans for joint exploration missions to discover new worlds to befriend. "Regret?" she said thoughtfully. "How could I regret something that brought so much good into the galaxy? Besides, my garden has never been more beautiful. When you plant seeds of kindness, you never know how far they might grow." As the celebration continued into the evening, with beings from across the galaxy learning Korean folk songs and sharing stories of their homeworlds, the most remarkable transformation in galactic history continued to unfold. The universe had learned that the most powerful force in existence was not advanced technology or military might, but the simple wisdom of a grandmother who refused to tolerate bad behavior and always had enough soup to share. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.